In today's lecture, we're going to be going over texture. Now, texture is very important for creating realistic artwork and even non-realistic artwork. Texture is what makes your artwork look interesting. So once you get down the fundamentals such as shape and form, value and contrast, well, then you need to add another layer of some interesting detail on there to really make your artwork pop. So today, we're going to be going over how to create texture. The first type of texture you can create is with contouring lines. So I'm going to quickly draw 4 circles, like so. And these are actually going to be spheres. And what we're going to do with them is we're going to add some contouring line texture to it. So how do you do that? Well, let's start with this first one. So the way I'm going to add in that texture is just like so. It's going to be a fur texture, and so all I'm going to do is I'm going to add in some contouring lines in the shape of my fur. And so I'm really randomizing it. Some of them are a little bit curvier, but they're just very short, simple lines that give the idea that this sphere has some fur texture. You'll also notice that my fur up here at the top is a lot flatter than down here. Down here, it's almost hanging because of gravity. Now we can go ahead and add in some more fur texturing on the inside of our sphere. Just like so. So now that looks like fur, even though there's no highlights or shadows, but it still gives the idea that there's fur there. Let's try another one. So the second one, we're going to make sort of a chipped away rock type of texture. So I'm going to start by creating the outline contouring line of my sphere, and it's going to be a little bit rocky and jaggedy rather than being a perfect sphere. Like so. Next, I'm going to go ahead and start adding in that texture. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to start making some geometrical forms, mostly trapezoids and rectangular type shapes, and maybe a triangle or two in there. But I'm just going to start connecting these to create the texture of sort of a chipped away type of rock texture. Now, as we get towards the edge of our shape, these shapes are going to be a lot thinner because they are curving around our object. And so you're going to see them in perspective, and then as they start to come around towards the middle, they're going to get a little bit wider. All right, perfect. So now we have a really cool texture on that. Let's try another one. So the next one we're going to do is going to be sort of a holy type asteroid type of a rock. And so let's start with the outside contouring line. So first off, I want to add in some holes on the outside of my rock. And these holes look like ovals because they're on the very edge of them. And so if you take a circle and turn it sideways, you're going to see an oval because of that perspective. So let's go ahead and start sketching that in. So we want a very rocky, jaggedy type of feel to the outside contouring line. Just like so. And then we can go ahead and start adding in some hole textures in there. All right, perfect. So now we have that really cool type of asteroid rock texture on that sphere. Now let's try one more. This last one is going to be sort of a rock texture that's nice and cracked and has a couple of little small dots and holes in it. So first off, I'm going to add in those cracks. Now you want to keep in mind that these cracks are being projected onto this round surface, so you need to take that into account when you're drawing your cracks. So you'll see this one right here kind of comes around in a curve, although it can still be a little bit random just because it is a crack. All right, great. Now let's go ahead and draw our outside contouring line. I'm going to have these overlap just a little bit because I think it makes it look interesting. So you'll see I kind of created a little edge at each one of these cracks. And then we can go ahead and add in some more texture in there by drawing some really light holes and spots. And sometimes texturing is just as simple as that, just adding little dots and spots onto your object to really break it up. Sometimes when I'm doing a portrait drawing, I like to add little spots and dots in random places in my background just to add some extra texture to my background. It just makes it look really nice. All right, perfect. So now we've created 4 different textures by using contouring lines. Now, to really make your textures look realistic, you need to be using highlights and shadows. So now we're going to start working with highlights and shadows to create our texture. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a fur ball like we did before, but this time we're going to use highlights and shadows to make that look a lot more realistic. So first off, I'm going to go ahead and create my circle like so. Next, I'm going to go ahead and add in my shadow. And I don't want it to be too dark. I just want to start a base shadow in there. And then we'll go ahead and add the rest of the shadow in when we add in the fur. All right, so now we're ready to start adding in our fur. So the way we're going to add in our fur is we want to make sure we first have a nice sharpened pencil. And then we're going to go ahead and start at the top. And like I said before, because of gravity, it's going to be pulling our hair down. So this hair is going to be going sideways. As we get to this point, it's going to be going diagonally, and by the time we get down to this bottom, it's just going to be hanging straight down. So let's go ahead and get started. So what we want to do is we just want to start adding in random lines like so, coming off of our ball. And remember to keep those angles in mind because of that gravity. That's really what's going to make your fur look real, is how it hangs, and then the light and shadow. So we want to start off by getting the outside of our ball. We can add some curved ones in there, and we can add some straight ones. We want to make it look really random. The more random, the more realistic it will look. And up here we can have a few that are sticking straight off and more at an angle, but for the most part we want them to be hanging down because of gravity. And then we can go ahead and start adding more to this inside area. So go ahead and start adding more random lines. And you'll see creating this fur texture is really just as simple as adding in simple lines. Now up here, I'm trying to keep my fur lines a little bit lighter. And as I get into the shadow area, I want to start darkening those lines. So once I start getting over here, I'm going to start making them darker. And that way we can start introducing the shadow and highlight to our fur. Alright, next what I want to do is I want to start adding some overlapping shadow or some cast shadow coming from some of these pieces of hair. So I'm going to start lumping them into kind of large groups of hair. So starting like, for example, right here, I'm going to go ahead and start adding some darker shadow in underneath the hair like so. And then that's slowly going to fade off into the fur underneath it. And we can go ahead and start adding that throughout our entire sketch. Great, so now we just created a realistic texture, which was a sphere texture, by using highlights and shadows as well as our contouring lines. Thanks for watching, and I really look forward to seeing you in tomorrow's lecture.